Hi, everyone. Thank you all for being here to celebrate Black History Month to highlight and celebrate the contributions of people of African descent to the Canadian story as well as their challenges. Before I delve into my speech, I would like to acknowledge that the land on which we have gathered is Treaty Number 6 territory and a traditional meeting ground and home for the First Nations, including both the treaty signatories, Cree, Saulteaux, Nakota Sioux, Stoney, and Cree Iroquois, as well as other indigenous peoples, such as the Blackfoot and Métis, who occupied this land. We extend our appreciation for the opportunity to live on this territorial land. Isn't Canada a great country? Yes, it is, and we can make it even better. My name is Flora Trebi Ollennu, as have been already introduced. What I would like to talk to you about today is what's in a public image through the prism of my experiences as an African immigrant. I arrived in Saskatchewan in 1991 to join my husband and to start a graduate program. Where is this place? My brother said when he came to visit later. It's in the middle of nowhere, whatever. Being who I am, I scanned my neighborhood and my surroundings pretty quickly. The houses looked the same. The people wore white socks and white sneakers and sweatsuits, not the fancy ones we have these days. Why? Is this a socialist state of sorts? I wondered. I vowed never to wear white socks or white sneakers. The first sneakers I bought, I think, were blue. And guess the color of my first socks I bought at Army and Navy? Brown. And for the record, here they are after 28 long years. I often wonder why I still have them. Now I know to show them to you. What a swift image I built about Saskatchewan and Canada within a few days of my arrival. You see how quickly we can build images about people and places. One of the popular songs playing on one particular radio station in Saskatchewan those days was "Don't Worry, Be Happy." It had this thing to it that made you sing along. Don't worry, be happy. But I wasn't happy. I had left my job as an assistant economic planning officer at the Ministry of Finance and Economic Planning in Ghana. And here I was in Canada, not finding a job, not even dishwashing. What to do while I wait to start my master's program the following year? I felt more like the other popular song, Leave Virginia Alone. Finally, I got called for an interview. Hooray! Thank God. He studied my CV with great interest. What a waste of skills. What waste. He murmured to himself. How Canada could bring such professionals and waste their skills in unemployment. He seemed to grapple with the thought. Finally, the inner struggle subsided and he said, I was just looking for a small office help. I'm sorry. The insurance company was blunt. The farmers might shoot you if they find you at their doorstep, but you can try. The baffling question is, why would someone shoot someone of a different race because she showed up at his door to talk to him. You all agree with me that the problem was with the public image of people of African descent. A supplanted public image is a political tool architects of a dominant economy use to justify past actions like oppression, mistakes, and exploitation of resources, both human and natural. Edward Albanese called it the engineering of consent. The question is, where did this come from? Sometimes it is important to understand the forces that shape our negative attitudes so we can transform them. This public image of people of African descent is supplanted because it replaced a decent human one. The process of supplanting began slowly when Europeans arrived in Africa to trade in the 15th and 16th centuries. But it took shape, form, and wings with the introduction of the transatlantic slave trade and French and English colonization policies in Africa. King Leopold II of Belgium, however, put the last nail in the coffin of this supplanted public image of Africans as poor, illiterate, and unable to manage themselves. I quote from listverse.com. From 1885 to 1908, Belgium King Leopold II took control of the Congo. He turned the nation into a money-making machine by farming ivory and rubber and building a fortune on the labor of the people who lived there. Leopold's harsh policies to keep people working turned into a brutal reign of mutilations and terror that led to the deaths of an estimated 10 million people in a few short years. And this, I believe, helped set the stage for the Holocaust. According to South Africa History Online, during the imperialistic exploits of Britain and France in Africa, they claimed exclusive trading rights with their colonies. These practices guaranteed them markets outside Europe for the sales of surplus goods and led to the practice of dumping. Now, dumping refers to the practice of offloading goods at very low prices to crush local competition for customers. African producers could not match these prices, especially in the absence of similar government support, and so they were unable to withstand European competition. This undermined the development of African industries and wealth and locked the continent into an unfair economic relationship with Europe, in which African producers were barely able to survive by supplying cheap cash crops and primary goods. This enforced the image of Africans as not able to manage themselves. These negative views were further enforced by giving weight to false and skewed accounts of European writers whose views about African societies was taken as gospel. Professor Simiyu Wandeba of University of Nairobi succinctly stated, "But if you want to rule a people, you don't want to give them credit." European scholars continue their assault, painting any successful civilizations or empires in sub-Saharan Africa as Middle Eastern. Through these processes, and raiding their lands of their art and craft to Europe, their histories were systematically obliterated. Recently, some persistent voices in Europe are asking for the return of these artifacts back to Africa. They are stolen items. the leading European powers of the time successfully defined Africans as having no useful place in history. And yet, Timbuktu lived in their songs and rhymes, and European explorers were making the dangerous trek into Africa in search of the mysterious city. It was a race against time. The University of Timbuktu was established around the same time period as the University of Bologna, the University of Paris, and the University of Oxford, all in the 1100s. The destruction of the University of Timbuktu contributed to the undoing of Africa. Thankfully, many writers of African descent have risen out of the ashes to publish the truth about the great empires and civilizations of Africa, their inventions, governing systems, and distinctive cultural development to debunk the disingenuous history of Africa written by Europeans. Historians like the late controversial Ali Mazrui of Kenya and Sheikh Anta Diop of Senegal, V.Y. Mudimbe of Congo, Afolayan, Falola, and Nafigo of Nigeria have given us, in the apt words of Ali Mazrui, a view from the inside to inspire people of African descent to become proactive actors on the world stage. A supplanted public image is also a political tool architects of a dominant economy use to justify present realities of systemic oppression and racism. The Canadian Encyclopedia states that Statistics Canada reported that immigrants born in Africa experience difficulties in the labor market, regardless of when they immigrated to Canada, and that of the 70,000 most recent immigrants who were African-born, there was an unemployment rate that was more than 4 times higher than that of Canadian-born individuals. However, compare how the same Canadian Encyclopedia reported on Asian immigrants from Uganda. Given the variety of skills and professional background they brought with them, coupled with their initiative with enterprising attitudes, most Ugandans have made steady socio-economic progress in Canada. You see how systemic the problem of the African image is. It pervades every aspect of Canadian society. So what is the Canadian Encyclopedia trying to project? That the African arriving in Canada is uneducated, have limited professional background, and lack entrepreneurial skills and initiative. The reason their unemployment rate is 4 times higher? You and I know that is not true. Many of our doctors and engineers are driving taxis, working in retail, etc. Because this supplanted public image of the African is deeply entrenched. This is a reality people of African descent face in this country they call home. And as Prime Minister Justin Trudeau reiterated, it's time we recognize that anti-black racism and unconscious bias does exist. How many of you know that children can change the course of your dreams and ambitions? My plan was to finish my master's and possibly my PhD, then go back to Ghana and grab some job opportunities awaiting me. But the plan changed. By the time I finished my master's, I had 3 of them, a girl followed by twins, my trophies. Then I realized one of them had a learning challenge, so I decided to homeschool, a blended program. I taught all the core courses to help the child develop friendships and an active social life. The child took physical education, band, and other options at school. Homeschooling taught me a lot about Canadian history and Canadian values and beliefs. I discovered soon enough that the social studies curriculum had barely anything on Africa save a paragraph on Timbuktu. But there were elaborate sections on Asian civilizations like China, Japan, Aztecs, etc. I had planned to write a strong letter to the school board, which I never had the opportunity to do with 4 children in tow. I saw the effect of this on my children and children of other African immigrants. They had no pride in being African. They could not find their place in the history of the world. Africa's space has been hijacked by a distorted history. They'd rather subscribe to some general Canadian identity. But there's nothing like that. Every Canadian has a heritage because it is very Canadian to ask about each other's heritage. And this brings me to my third point on supplanted public image. A supplanted public image is a political tool architects of a dominant economy use to sabotage future potential of the seemingly economically weak ones. What was my response to this yawning absence of Africa's place in history in the school curriculum? I began writing children's books set in Ghana, but their families, their dreams, their passions, their education, festivals they celebrate, and rites of passage. I wanted my children to understand that what they see and hear in the media and largely left out of their social studies curriculum are distortions of Africa. The reporter who interviewed me about the books was taken aback as he exclaimed, "Children are children everywhere in the world. They have questions, dreams, aspirations, pestering brothers and loving parents and relatives," he wrote in the Beaumont newspaper. Prof. George Sifade, also a Ghanaian of the University of Toronto, is acknowledged today for his immense contribution to solving this problem. He advocated for African-focused schools in Canada to focus on the contributions to society made by Africans and Black Canadians and a curriculum more deeply rooted in African thought. The Star reported that students at the press conference praised the elementary school for wrapping them in a sense of African Canadian identity through assignments on everything from Black history to Black mathematicians. Many more of these schools are needed, and similar curriculum must be in place in all schools. Unfair trade is another tool employed to sabotage the future of people of African descent. Nothing has changed much from the days of the imperialistic exploits of Britain and France in Africa. In 2017, The Guardian reported that in 2012, the last year of recorded data, developing countries received a total of $1.3 trillion, including all aid, investment, and income from abroad. But that same year, some $3.3 trillion flowed out of them. In other words, developing countries sent $2 trillion more to the rest of the world than they received. If we look at all years since 1980, these net outflows add up to an eye-popping total of $16.3 trillion. That's how much money has been drained out of the global south over the past few decades. To get a sense for the scale of this, $16.3 trillion is roughly the GDP of the United States. This is called aid in reverse. So before you subscribe to the supplanted public image of Africans being corrupt and lazy, you may want to reconsider. Understand, however, that it is not your fault that you have been brought up in a culture that has engineered your consent to this supplanted public image of people of African descent. But you will be complicit if you are not intentional in deconstructing it by your personal decisions and actions. And it is not the fault of people of African descent to be framed in this supplanted public image. But we will be complicit if we are not intentional in deconstructing this image by our decisions and actions. The Canadian government has done well in putting in place progressive policies to address racism and its attendant ills. So, why is the experience of an African immigrant relevant? Because my story is an integral part of Canada's history. Canada is like a tree, and every one of us are the roots. Roots need air and space and won't grow as well in compacted soil. So let's give each other space, spacious respect, and air of freedom, so we can create adequate soil to nurture the tree called Canada into a fruitful one. When light passes through a prism, refraction splits the light into its component wavelengths, and you see a rainbow. And that's how I see my experience in Canada. Today I'm a writer, a publisher, and a social entrepreneur because I decided to live here in Canada. I've been able to found a nonprofit committed to maternal and child health. Here in Canada, we focus on the mental and emotional health of multiple births families. We celebrate National Multiple Births Awareness Day in Canada every May and 21st in July with various events to promote awareness of the challenges of multiple pregnancies and multiple births. In Africa, we focus on physical access to health for mothers and children. You are all invited to attend our events in May and July. I brought along brochures to familiarize you with our programs. I end with a short poem in honor of people of African descent and every immigrant, past and present. That you packed bag and baggage and came, you have done well. That you did not just come to scout, but to settle, you have done well. That you did not just contribute, but in contributing, you found you, and you found me. You have done well. That in finding you and finding me, we defined a country. You have done well. Your accent accentuated our communication. It infused it in shades of rich hues, from the snowy caps of the Rockies, through the bogs of the Boreal, to the living skies of the prairies, over the sprawling swaths of the Great Lakes, up to the glacial guardians of the Arctic. You have gained more leverage leaving than staying. You have gained more leverage holding up than caving in. You are not an abject immigrant. You are not an abject native.